Ever get that feeling like you want to really wrap your brain around something, like something really big, go way past the quick little summaries and really get what made it tick?
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're doing today with just the amazing life and mind of Stephen Hawking.
Right.
You, our listener, you specifically asked us to dive deeper into him, and we've got a super in-depth resource to work with. This Wikipedia entry, it lays out his whole incredible journey.
Right.
Our mission, it's to pull out the truly fascinating insights, the unexpected twists in his story, and the massive legacy that he left us.
Yeah.
We don't want to just skim the surface here,
Yeah.
We want to understand his impact, really get it.
Right. Absolutely. I think a lot of people know the name Stephen Hawking, but they might not really know the story behind the name. And that's really what we're going to try to do today. We're going to move beyond just the basic facts of his life and really kind of dig into what made him such a remarkable person.
Okay, so let's rewind all the way back to the beginning.
Okay.
To his, his formative years.
Right.
Stephen William Hawking. He was born on January 8th, 1942 in Oxford, England.
Right.
And interestingly enough, his family, they had a strong connection to the world of medicine.
Yeah, both of his parents, Frank and Isabel Hawking, they both went to Oxford, which, was not an easy thing to do at that time, especially considering the financial kind of hurdles that they had to overcome. His mom's family had been doctors, going way back in Scotland. And his father was a medical researcher specializing in tropical diseases. So there was a definite kind of a scientific bent in the family.
Yeah, he kind of saw that path of scientific inquiry as a natural one to follow. Oh, that's what we do in our family.
Yeah, it makes sense.
In 1950, the family, they moved to St. Albans.
Okay.
And what we know about their family life, it seems like it was very, very intellectual.
Right.
Almost unconventional.
Mm-hmm.
Get this, they would read books silently during meals.
Oh, wow.
Right. And they traveled around in a converted London taxi cab. So, very unique upbringing for sure.
It's really interesting to think about the kind of environment that fosters, a mind like his. You've got this intellectual rigor combined with a certain quirky, kind of a almost eccentric way of looking at the world.
Right.
And I mean, even his early schooling had these kind of interesting twists and turns. He went to Byron House School, but he later kind of jokingly said that their progressive methods were probably why he didn't learn to read until he was 8 years old.
Really?
Which, is amazing to think about.
Yeah.
He also went for a short time to St. Albans High School for Girls.
Oh.
Which at that time they allowed younger boys in one of the houses.
Oh, okay.
And then he went to Radlett School and finally St. Albans School. So there's this kind of mix of different educational experiences in there.
Now, here's a fascinating little detail.
Mm-hmm.
Despite becoming, a name that is synonymous with brilliance, Hawking wasn't always a star student.
Really?
Right. In fact, he earned the nickname Einstein, almost like a playful, jab at his lack of success in the classroom.
Right.
So it really shows you that genius, it doesn't always follow, a straight line. And early performance, it doesn't necessarily mean, what you're going to achieve later in life.
Right. Absolutely. It's a good reminder that everybody develops at their own pace and you never really know when someone's going to just blossom.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't until later in his school years that, his real aptitude for science began to kind of emerge.
Right.
And it was really under the influence of his mathematics teacher, Dikran Tata.
Okay.
That's when he was wow, I love math.
Right.
He was so inspired by Tata that he wanted to study mathematics at university.
Uh-huh.
But his dad, ever the practical one, advised against that. He was no, you should study medicine. You'll have a better career.
It's funny how parents always want what's best for their kids, but sometimes they don't quite see the kid's true passion.
Right, exactly. And so that kind of brings us to his time at Oxford.
Okay.
So in 1959, at the age of 17, he gets a scholarship to University College, Oxford.
Wow.
Interestingly enough, mathematics wasn't an option there. So he went for physics and chemistry.
Okay.
Now, his undergraduate experience at Oxford, it really, really shows you how naturally brilliant he was.
Right.
He himself actually said that the academic work during his first year and a half was ridiculously easy.
Wow.
And his physics tutor, Robert Berman, said something really interesting. He said that Hawking, he only needed to know that a problem could be solved. and he could figure out the solution without even looking at how anyone else had done it before.
That's amazing. That's real natural talent right there.
It really is.
Like seeing the path forward.
Yeah, but it wasn't all work and no play at Oxford,
Right.
During his second and third year, he really became a social butterfly. He was very popular, known for his wits, and he developed a big interest in classical music and science fiction. And get this, he joined the boat club and became a coxswain, and apparently not a very cautious one.
Oh.
Yeah. The rowing coach at the time, he said that Hawking would steer the boat on these risky courses, and they often ended up with a damaged boat.
Wow, that's kind of a daredevil streak coming out there.
I know, right?
You wouldn't necessarily expect that from someone so focused on theoretical physics.
I know, but it's like he's testing boundaries, like almost preparing to face these, challenges that life is going to throw at him later on.
Right. Like he's building up his resilience in a way.
Yeah, exactly. So despite this active social life, he estimated that he only studied for about 1,000 hours during his entire time at Oxford.
Wow.
Right.
That's not a lot.
I know. So when it came time for his final exams, facing, not the best study habits, he decided to just focus on theoretical physics questions.
Makes sense. Play to your strengths.
I know, right? But here's the kicker. His results, they were borderline.
Oh, no.
So close that he had to go through what's called a viva.
An oral exam.
An oral exam, yeah.
That's got to be nerve-wracking.
I know. So they're asking him about his plans, depending on whether he gets a first or a second-class degree.
Right.
And he basically told them, you better give me a first because I'm only going to Cambridge if I get a first.
Wow. So he basically called their bluff.
He did. And you know what? It worked. He got his first-class BA degree in physics.
That's amazing.
I know. Then he took a trip to Iran. And then in October 1962, he started his graduate work at Trinity Hall, Cambridge.
So maybe a bit of a rocky start academically, but clearly he found his footing.
He did.
And Cambridge, that's where things really start to get interesting, right? Not just academically, but personally as well.
Absolutely. And his move to Cambridge, it marked a major turning point, not just in his academic life, but in his personal life as well. So initially, he had hoped to work with this renowned astronomer, Fred Hoyle.
Okay.
But he ended up working with Dennis Williams Sciama.
Okay.
Who's a very influential figure in modern cosmology.
Right.
And then this is when the life-altering diagnosis happened.
No, right.
In 1963, at just 21 years old, he was diagnosed with an early-onset, slow-progressing form of motor neuron disease, also known as ALS.
Right.
And initially, the doctors gave him a really, really devastating prognosis. They said he only had 2 years to live.
Wow.
Which is just unimaginable to receive news like that at such a young age.
Yeah.
Just as your career is starting, your life is starting.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to even fathom what that must have been like.
Yeah. He understandably experienced a period of, deep depression.
Yeah.
He was like, what's the point of even continuing my studies if I only have 2 years left?
Yeah.
But the disease progressed much slower than they initially thought.
Oh, okay.
And while he did experience increasing difficulty walking and his speech became slurred, that initial 2-year timeline, it turned out to be way off.
That's got to be a mix of emotions right there.
Right. Like relief, but also, So what really stands out, though, is his reaction to this, horrible news. He famously said that before his diagnosis, he found life kind of boring.
Really?
But that the prospect of an early death, it made him realize that life was actually worth living.
That's a pretty profound shift in perspective.
Yeah.
It really shows how facing our own mortality can sometimes make us appreciate the present moment so much more.
Exactly. So as the disease progressed over the years, he faced increasing paralysis. And he eventually lost his ability to speak altogether. And that's when he started to rely on a speech-generating device to communicate.
Right.
And it started with a handheld switch, but then he eventually upgraded to a system that was controlled by just his cheek muscle movements.
Wow.
Which is incredible to think about how, technology can help people connect with the world in such a profound way.
Absolutely. It really highlights the power of human ingenuity to overcome incredible challenges.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
But despite all these, physical challenges he faced, he was incredibly independent. And he wanted to be seen first and foremost as a scientist, not as someone defined by his illness.
Right. And that's such a powerful message, right?
Yeah.
That we are not limited by our physical circumstances, but by our own perceptions and aspirations.
Yeah. And it fueled his scientific journey. Working with Roger Penrose, he made some groundbreaking contributions to our understanding of general relativity.
Right.
Specifically, their work on gravitational singularity theorems.
Yeah.
So for those of us who are not, theoretical physicists, can you explain what those are and why they're so important?
Right. So essentially what these theorems do is they show mathematically that under very, very strong gravitational forces, like those you'd find at the center of a black hole or at the very beginning of the universe in the Big Bang,
Okay.
space and time themselves come to an end in what we call singularities.
Okay.
So imagine space-time, like a fabric.
Sure.
These theorems basically say that under extreme gravity, this fabric, it gets so warped and curved that it essentially rips, leading to a point where our understanding of space and time completely breaks down.
Wow.
And this was revolutionary because it challenged the prevailing scientific view at the time. A lot of people were trying to avoid these singularities in their models.
Right.
And this was a major kind of a conceptual leap forward. And their joint essay on this topic was actually a runner-up in the 1968 Gravity Research Foundation competition.
Oh, wow.
So even early on, people were starting to recognize the significance of this work.
And then you have Hawking radiation.
Yeah.
This is probably one of his most famous and paradigm-shifting theoretical predictions.
Yeah.
So can you break that down for us, in a way that, we can really get it?
Okay. So imagine this, right?
Okay.
You have black holes, which are these incredibly dense objects where gravity is so strong that nothing, not even light, can escape. That's the classical understanding. But Hawking, he brought together two seemingly different areas of physics, Einstein's theory of gravity, general relativity, and quantum mechanics, which is the physics of the very, very small. And he showed that black holes, they actually emit radiation due to quantum effects near their event horizon.
Wow.
So it's they're not completely black after all. They kind of glow a little bit, but it's a very faint glow. And this radiation, it's now called Hawking radiation.
Okay.
It was very controversial when he first proposed it, but by the late 1970s, it became widely accepted as a major breakthrough.
That is mind-blowing.
It is, because it means that black holes, they're not eternal.
Okay.
Over extremely long periods of time, they actually evaporate.
A black hole just disappearing.
Yeah, that's the idea. It completely changes how we think about these objects.
Wow.
And it's all because of this interplay between gravity and quantum mechanics, which we still don't fully understand.
And his groundbreaking work didn't stop there. He was also among the first to propose a theory of cosmology that tries to unify general relativity and quantum mechanics.
Yeah, that's right. He was trying to create a framework to describe the entire universe.
The whole universe.
The whole shebang, from the very smallest particles to the largest structures.
Wow.
And he was a big supporter of the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which basically says that all possible outcomes of a quantum measurement, they actually happen in different universes.
Like parallel universes.
Exactly. There's a universe where you chose to have pizza for dinner tonight and another where you chose salad. It gets kind of trippy.
Yeah. So he was dealing with some pretty big ideas.
Oh, yeah. He wasn't afraid to tackle the really fundamental questions about the nature of reality.
Okay. So he also introduced this concept of a micro black hole.
Right.
So what's so significant about these, tiny theoretical black holes? Okay, so these are black holes that are so small, much, much smaller than the ones formed from collapsing stars. And the idea is that they might have formed in the very early universe, right after the Big Bang. And these micro black holes, they could be a way to connect black hole physics with particle physics and the very early universe. So it's like a window into the extreme conditions of the early universe.
And his work, diving into black hole dynamics led him to formulate some really, really fundamental laws, didn't it?
Yeah. So in the early 1970s, he came up with the second law of black hole dynamics, which states that the total area of the event horizon of a black hole can never decrease over time.
Okay.
And then he worked with James Bardeen and Brandon Carter, and they proposed these 4 laws of black hole mechanics,
Okay.
which are really kind of analogous to the laws of thermodynamics, which govern heat and energy. It was Jacob Bekenstein who actually took this analogy even further and suggested that black holes have something called entropy,
Okay.
which is a measure of disorder or randomness. And Hawking, he initially resisted this idea, but later came to embrace it. And this led to what we now call the Bekenstein-Hawking formula, which actually quantifies the entropy of a black hole.
Wow.
And it was a major step forward in our understanding of black holes.
So he also supported Wheeler's no-hair theorem.
Right.
What's that all about?
So the no-hair theorem is a pretty interesting idea.
Okay.
It says that black holes are remarkably simple objects.
Okay.
Once matter falls into a black hole, all the information about its initial state is lost.
Okay.
The only things you can measure from the outside are its mass, electric charge, and angular momentum or spin. So it doesn't matter if you throw in, a piano or a car or a book.
Okay.
The black hole, it just kind of forgets what went in.
Wow.
It's like a cosmic blender. You just get this kind of homogeneous mixture at the end.
Okay. So his work really delved into, the very fabric of reality.
Yeah.
Exploring quantum gravity, the principles of quantum mechanics. The source material actually mentioned these really important discussions he had in Moscow that kind of sparked some of this groundbreaking work.
Right. So he visited Moscow, and he had these great discussions with these Soviet physicists, Yakov Zeldovich and Alexei Starobinsky. And their work suggested that rotating black holes should emit particles due to quantum mechanics.
Okay.
So this insight was a really important step towards Hawking's own discovery of Hawking radiation.
And then there's the black hole information paradox.
Oh, yeah.
This is a puzzle that, really, really occupied his mind for years.
It did.
So what's at the heart of this paradox?
Okay. So the paradox comes from this conflict between Hawking radiation and the principles of quantum mechanics.
Mhm.
So we know that black holes evaporate over time because of this Hawking radiation.
Okay.
But quantum mechanics says that information cannot be lost. So the question is, what happens to the information about the stuff that falls into a black hole?
Right.
Does it just disappear?
Right.
Or is it somehow preserved?
Right.
Hawking, he initially thought that information was lost, but that caused a lot of debate in the physics community. People like Leonard Susskind and Gerard 't Hooft, they strongly disagreed.
Yeah.
And over time, Hawking, he obviously changed his mind. He started exploring different possibilities like black holes having multiple topologies or shapes,
Okay.
and the role of alternative universe histories. And he even eventually called his initial belief in information loss his biggest blunder.
Wow. So he was willing to admit when he was wrong.
Yeah, he was. And that's a really important quality in a scientist, to be open to new ideas and to change your mind when the evidence demands it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So speaking of, the beginning of the universe, his collaboration with Jim Hartle led to this really cool concept, the Hartle-Hawking state.
Yeah.
So what did that propose about, how it all started?
Okay. So the Hartle-Hawking state, it basically said that if you go all the way back to the very beginning of the universe, before what we call the Planck epoch,
Right.
the universe had no boundary in space-time.
Okay.
So there was no beginning of time in the traditional sense. It's kind of like the surface of a sphere.
Okay.
You can travel anywhere on the surface, but there's no edge.
Right.
And so in this model, the Big Bang, it's not a singularity. It's just a point in time where the universe was very, very small and dense.
Okay. And his work, wasn't always about these abstract theoretical things. He also made predictions about, things that we could actually test, like the Higgs boson.
Right.
So he actually bet against the discovery of the Higgs boson.
He did.
He even had a public debate with Peter Higgs about it.
Yeah.
But when the Higgs boson was discovered at CERN in 2012, he quickly admitted he was wrong and congratulated Higgs.
Yeah, he even said that Higgs deserved the Nobel Prize, which he ended up winning the next year. So, it shows that he was a good sport and that he respected empirical evidence.
And later on, he developed this thing called top-down cosmology with Thomas Hertog and Jim Hartle.
Right.
So how did that build on his earlier work?
Okay. So top-down cosmology, it kind of flipped the traditional way of thinking about the universe.
Okay.
Instead of starting with the initial conditions and then working forward, it started with the present state of the universe and worked backward.
Okay.
So it's kind of like saying that the present state of the universe, it selects its own past from all the possible histories.
Wow.
It's a really interesting idea, and it offers a possible solution to this problem called the fine-tuning problem.
Okay.
Which basically asks, why are the constants of nature so perfectly tuned for life to exist?
Right.
And top-down cosmology, it suggests that maybe the universe is the way it is because it has to be in order for us to be here to observe it.
So even in the last years of his life, he was still really, really active in pushing the boundaries of theoretical physics. His very last scientific paper was published after he died.
Right.
So what was he still working on?
So his last paper, it was called A Smooth Exit from Eternal Inflation.
Okay.
And it looked at the theory of eternal inflation, which basically says that the universe is constantly inflating, creating new bubble universes all the time.
Wow.
And his paper was trying to figure out how our universe might have emerged from this eternal inflation.
That is amazing. And his later research also kind of circled back to that black hole information paradox, focusing on black hole entropy and soft hair.
Yeah.
So how did these ideas play into the whole debate?
So entropy is a measure of the amount of information a system can hold. And soft hair refers to subtle quantum properties on the event horizon of a black hole.
Okay.
And Hawking's idea was that this soft hair could somehow encode information about the stuff that falls into a black hole. So it's like the information is not lost, it's just stored in a different form.
Wow.
It's a really clever idea, but it's still being debated among physicists.
Okay. So it's amazing to consider all this incredible work, especially given his physical challenges.
Right. It's truly remarkable.
But his impact, it went way beyond the scientific community. He also became a hugely successful author of popular science books.
Absolutely. He had this amazing ability to explain really complex ideas in a way that anyone could understand.
Yeah.
He wanted to share his love of the universe with everyone.
Right.
Not just other scientists.
And he achieved that with a brief history of time.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a massive success, staying on the Sunday Times bestseller list for 237 weeks straight.
That's insane.
It is. And it sold an estimated 9 million copies worldwide.
It really captured the public's imagination.
Totally. But writing that book, it wasn't easy.
Oh, yeah.
His editor at Bantam Books, he really pushed Hawking to explain his ideas in simple language that anyone could understand.
Right.
And that meant a lot of rewrites and some frustration for Hawking. But the end result, it was clearly worth it.
Yeah, definitely.
He also wrote other popular science books.
Right.
Black Holes and Baby Universes, The Universe in a Nutshell, A Briefer History of Time, and Brief Answers to the Big Questions.
Yeah, he had quite a bibliography.
Through these books and his public appearances, he became, a global celebrity. They even called him Master of the Universe.
That's a pretty awesome title.
It is.
But I imagine that kind of fame can be a double-edged sword.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it brought him, financial rewards and a platform to share his ideas.
Right.
But it also put a lot of demands on his time. And some of his colleagues, they weren't so thrilled about all the attention he was getting.
It's understandable. Sometimes success can breed resentment, especially in a competitive field like science.
Yeah. So it's a really interesting, complex dynamic.
It is.
Now let's talk about his personal life, which, like his scientific career had its ups and downs. So he was married twice. First to Jane Wilde from 1965 to 1995. And they had 3 children together, Robert, Lucy, and Timothy.
Okay.
He later married Elaine Mason in 1995, and they divorced in 2007.
Okay.
So his first marriage to Jane, it faced a lot of strain because of his illness.
Yeah.
He needed constant care. And they also had very different views on religion.
Right.
Jane actually wrote a memoir about their life together.
Mm-hmm.
First, it was called Music to Move the Stars, and then later it was revised and called Traveling to Infinity.
Right.
So that gives you a very personal look at what they went through.
It must have been really challenging to navigate those circumstances,
It was.
both the personal and the professional.
Yeah. So in the late 1980s, his relationship with one of his nurses, Elaine Mason, became more serious, and he eventually left Jane to marry Elaine.
Okay.
But sadly, that marriage also ended in divorce in 2007. And there were actually some allegations of physical abuse during that marriage. The police investigated it. But Hawking, he didn't press charges. So that's a really difficult aspect of his life to talk about.
Yeah, it is. It's a reminder that even brilliant minds can be caught up in really complex and difficult personal situations.
Right. But it's worth noting that he did reconcile with Jane and his children later in life.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah. So the progression of his disease, it had such a huge impact on his everyday life. He started experiencing clumsiness even before his diagnosis. And then he gradually lost more and more of his physical abilities, eventually needing crutches and then a wheelchair. What's interesting? He was actually really reluctant to use a wheelchair at first.
Really?
Yeah. But then, once he started using it, he became kind of known for driving it like a bit of a daredevil.
Oh, wow. That's kind of surprising.
I know, right?
Like he was reclaiming his agency in a way.
Oh,
Like this wheelchair might confine me, but I'm still going to push the limits.
Yeah. And as his speech got worse, he started using those speech-generating devices.
Right.
First, the program called Equalizer, and then these more advanced systems. And he actually got really attached to his original synthesized voice.
Yeah, he said he identified with it,
Right.
even though there were more natural-sounding voices available later on.
Yeah, he didn't want to change.
It became part of his persona.
Totally.
So did he ever become, involved in advocating for people with disabilities?
He did. He campaigned for, practical changes in Cambridge, like ramps and adapted housing.
Right.
But he had kind of mixed feelings about being seen as a disability rights champion.
Yeah, I can see that. He wanted to help others, but he also wanted to be recognized for his science, first and foremost.
Right.
It's a delicate balance.
It is. So in 1985, he had this near-fatal bout of pneumonia,
Oh, right.
and this led to a tracheotomy,
Oh, wow.
and he lost his natural voice completely. And the National Health Service, they were ready to put him in a nursing home.
Really?
But Jane, his wife, she insisted that he stay at home. And an American foundation ended up covering the cost of his 24-hour care.
That's incredible.
It is. And this is actually when Elaine Mason became one of his nurses.
Okay.
So it was a major turning point in his life, obviously,
Yeah.
having to communicate in a completely different way.
Right.
But you know what? Despite all of it, he kept doing his work.
Yeah. He never gave up.
He didn't. And he eventually kind of embraced this role as an inspiration for people with disabilities.
Right.
He participated in things like the Charter for the Third Millennium on Disability, and he even narrated the opening ceremony of the 2012 Paralympic Games in London.
Wow, that's amazing.
And get this, he even got to experience space travel.
Really?
Yeah, he took a zero-gravity flight with Virgin Galactic in 2007.
That's so cool.
I know. It was like a lifelong dream of his.
Yeah, it shows you that anything is possible.
It does. And he saw it, and not just as, a personal achievement, but as a way to inspire people and promote space exploration.
That's really awesome.
So beyond all of this, amazing science in his personal life, he also has some really strong views on other things.
Right.
Like philosophy, the future of humanity, aliens.
Okay.
So he actually said that philosophy is dead.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement.
It is.
What did he mean by that?
He basically said that philosophers hadn't kept up with science,
Okay.
and that scientists were now the ones asking the big questions about the universe.
So he saw science as the new philosophy?
Yeah, kind of.